Among the things that I've been tasked to do is to share with you many, many, many measurable attributes of holiness. There are several purposes that the Lord has in this. One of them is that anytime you're shown an attribute that a human can have, you're also given the means to develop it yourself. That's not true in physical things, but it is true in spiritual things. Because all spiritual things consist of and come through ideas. And ideas can be freely shared. So once you have them, you can do what you will with them, and you're not limited by physical limitations. It's just a measure of faith. So that's kind of a big deal. And I'm quite excited about that. The list is long, and it has an order and all of the things that the priority of things that I have to do. But as I am going through notes here, a mixed collection of notes, not about that in particular. There's a set of these attributes that pertain to kids, and I can't hold those in. I will have to share them. So I get to. I don't have to. I get to. There's a section in 3 Nephi 17 where Jesus is interacting with people who devoutly served him, and then, as he's ministering in Jerusalem, and then once he's killed and resurrected, he comes and visits the Americas. And these devout people who are waiting for him, who went through some really terrible trials before this, he teaches them many of the same things he taught in Jerusalem. And he ministers to them, not just in word, but in deed. And so during this whole process, it says, he took their little children one by one and blessed them, and prayed unto the Father for them. And when he had done this, he wept again. And he spake unto the multitude, and said unto them, Behold your little ones. And as they looked to behold, they cast their eyes towards heaven. And they saw the heavens open, and they saw angels descending out of heaven, as it were in the midst of fire. And they came down and encircled those little ones about, and they were encircled about with fire, and the angels did minister unto them. And the multitude did see and hear and bear record. And they know that their record is true, for they all of them did see and hear, every man for himself. So, none of those children would have been there if their parents hadn't brought them. But once they were there, Jesus was able to do things with their children that he was not able to do with them. Greater things. And there are reasons for this. So those children were brought through the destruction that preceded this event by their parents, by the faithfulness of their parents, because only the most righteous were spared, and only the most righteous of the righteous reacted to all of those terrible things by conducting themselves to this place that it had been prophesied Jesus would come to after all of this. And so that would have been hard enough to do under normal circumstances, but in extreme depravity they didn't have food, they didn't have medical treatment because a lot of people were wounded, everything was destroyed, things were crazy, and in this very, very terrible challenge, they navigated through to get to where they thought Jesus would come. This is extremely important for the latter days. For the end times, this pattern will play out once again. So, because the parents exercised faith to do all that they could, they were brought to a place where the situation reversed, and now the faithfulness of the children and the purity of the children was able to bring blessings to the parents. And they thought that all of this was marvelous enough that they bore record of it. They wrote it down. They wrote it down. So, I say to you, behold your little ones. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail with what I'm about to say, so I'll try to be careful here. I'm not keeping secrets. I just want to help you as best I can. And there are a lot of things to get snagged on with this. So, false traditions, they're kind of like those weeds. There are various versions of this, but here we have hound's tooth, and it's a flower, but then it gets all these burrs, and if you so much as look at this thing, you're covered in them. So a dog will walk through and just be totally covered in them, or your pants, you just kind of look at it and your pants get covered in it, and it's really annoying because they're like Velcro and you have to pull them off one at a time. And those are false traditions are like that, and they'll just ruin pretty much anything. And so while they are layered on thick, there's only so much we can say about certain things. But there are children on this earth right now, and people older than children right now, who have roles to play in the end times, and the roles that you've read about in the scriptures. And they will contribute significantly to the Lord's work from now until when he comes again. And it's not most kids, and it's certainly not most adults, but these people are out there. And it is completely possible that part of your role, you specifically, if you're watching this, is to raise such a child. So, or you might be one of those adults, but this is focused on the idea that maybe you have or will have one of these kids. So, like the mother of Jesus, you have a responsibility, or the parents of Samson, or we could go on and on. You have a responsibility to facilitate the Lord's training of these people to take up the role they were born to play, the mission they were born to live. And so, while that's a daunting thought, and it would take an awful lot to fully flesh out exactly how one does this, even if it's sort of beyond us right now to talk about the fullness of what this entails, a good goal is to at least not make things worse as their parent. At least don't make things worse. That's actually a really important standard and has a lot to do with covenants and the right to abide. Don't make things worse. At least don't make things worse. So, in sharing some of the signs of great light in children with you, which many of these things are going to be things you've never thought about, I hope that one application of what you learn here is going to be that you do less harm to your kids than you would otherwise do. And from the outset, I'll say, you're going to notice that at least some of these signs could easily be misinterpreted as something being wrong with the kid, which might trigger you to adopt the world's practices to treat such quote-unquote problems. And that would be one great example of making things worse than they would otherwise be. So think about this and take it to the Lord and take it to the scriptures and think about it with your brain and try not to cause greater harm than will already be caused these people, because they are very precious to the Lord. So without further ado, children with great light, they will notice things. They will notice things that even adults do not notice. Some examples, this is just a partial list. They will see and feel the urgency of problems before adults do. They will also, from time to time, they will have solutions to problems beyond or before adults. And this, I was going to call this out when we were reading the passage from 3 Nephi 17. This is an appropriate place to draw attention to the fact that parents have a tendency to minimize it's funny because this is one of very many mutually exclusive ideas that modern people hold at the same time. But on the one hand, parents have a reluctance to believe that it's possible for their children to be wiser or better than them. And then on the other, modern parents also just automatically give kids everything that they want. And those are mutually exclusive positions. And they reveal the true motive of giving kids whatever they want, which is almost always laziness on the part of the parent and selfishness on the part of the parent, although they will claim that they're being selfless and virtuous in giving their kids everything that their kids ask for. They're actually just seeking to shut their kids up and feel less guilty about being a parent who doesn't actually care about their kids. So when kids have see problems beyond what adults see or before what adults see, and they have solutions beyond what adults have and before adults have them, that could be a humility check for a parent who wants to be in control and wants to be better than their kids. And I have heard, unfortunately, at least one parent falsely cite the commandment from the 10 Commandments. It says, honor thy father and thy mother, and try to justify what is actually unrighteous dominion, which is to take the authority of leadership or exercise the authority of leadership beyond the virtue of the person. God's power always co-occurs with his character, and to the extent that another person is closer to God, we have the obligation, or better said, the opportunity to yield to that as we demonstrate that we truly do care more about God than ourselves or the world. And this is not excused in a parent-child relationship. If you have a child who is closer to the Lord than you are, then in spite of the fact that you are their legal protector, they are your spiritual leader. That is what God has arranged, like it or not. You should like it because it carries with it some tremendous special benefits for the parents. But this is something that people really don't like because they're prideful and they love many things more than God, including themselves. Anyway, back to the signs. They will be stronger in afflictions than adults would be in their position. This is a shocking thing to see. As I go through this, I'm going to give you a few examples. So one example of this is I knew a girl. How young was she? She was really young. Probably not a teenager yet. And she was in a serious car accident with her sister, who was older than her. And the younger sister got very badly hurt. And she said that she was glad that it happened that way because her older sister would not be able to take it as well. That is an example of being stronger in affliction than most adults are. There are very few adults who would say, please whip me because I'd rather they not be hurt. Where, this was a situation where neither of them were driving, and so they were both innocent of the consequence of the mistake of another person. So this sign is easier to see when a family emergency arises, something where a catalyst can be applied to more than just this person, because then that gives you something to compare against, right? This is also another sign, is how they react to the same resources. So what they do with the same resources. I don't have that on my list, so bear with me. These things are going into a book. What they do with the same resources. So this is when you get a set of siblings who grow up together and they're pretty close in age. They all have the same external resources, but the decisions they make are tremendously different and the outcomes are tremendously different. And so this is a difference as well. Children with great light, they will feel personally responsible for much more than normal children do. Normal children do not really think about anything outside of themselves. That's not a normal. It's normal for kids to just say, everything I feel is what is, everything I see is what is, and I'm in it to just get as many cookies as I can. And that's just a normal kid thing to do. But children with exceptional light, they feel a responsibility for situations and people around them. And, there's a phrase, the smartest person in the room, or the most beautiful woman in a room, or maybe you've heard these phrases before. There's also the most responsible person in the room. And when we say that, no one ever says that. That's the first time you've heard that phrase. So when we say the word responsible, in common parlance, what we mean is one who can be trusted, right? But that's not what I mean. I mean one who feels the burden of everything. So who feels like they have to pay attention to what's going on and be the mature adult in the room. And you might be thinking, what kid would feel that way? That's crazy, because again, most adults don't feel that way. Most adults will assume that someone else is in charge. They'll assume that someone else is bearing the burden of whatever the situation is. They don't look ahead to the future because they just assume it's going to be okay. But there is this thing. Oh, sorry, I keep hitting this table. There is this idea, and so how do you tell? How do you tell? Well, maybe they get worked up about things that no one else gets worked up about, and many of these traits, they have a negative manifestation that does not indicate greater light. So if you're just anxious about everything, that's not the same as being responsible for everything. There's a difference, right? So one way you can tell with this is, how do they change in situations where a strong and good person is present? A strong and good person. So you'll find that they relax a lot more. They feel more comfortable. And this is an indication that they feel personally responsible for everything and everyone around them. These things, there are many ties between them, in case it's not obvious. So if you find at a very young age that you can see problems before adults see them, and that you have solutions for these problems before adults have them, you will feel responsible for it, right? Can you see how those things are connected together? And they're not causal per se, but they co-occur. They influence each other. They will not like doing what they don't fully believe in. And how does this manifest? They protest things. I don't mean with signs, but they will fight you as their parents. They will fight you on things that are kind of weird and unexpected to fight about. They will resist you on things that, like, let's go to the zoo, and they have a tantrum about it. And depending on the age, right? But what is how it'll manifest. It might just be a vocal discussion. They might get pouty about it, and they might, downright fall on the floor and start banging it or something. And this is because they feel a necessity to align their whole being with what they really believe. Now, we'll pause here because there's some meta level stuff we have to talk about. So as I'm saying this, I can see and feel that some people are going to, let's go meta there. Isn't it interesting that I can see and feel reactions that have not yet occurred? I'm recording this on November 4th. I have no idea when people are going to see it. And I'm not where you are. I'm not in the room with you. But I know that some people are going to react in some ways because the Lord is showing me that. So some people are going to react to this by saying, man, you're putting an awful lot of depth into kids in the way you're describing them. Kids don't feel this way. Kids don't do these things. Most kids don't. That's my point, right? That's point number one. Second point, I just mentioned how one response to, or one behavior you might see in a holy child, I guess we haven't used the word holy, but a child with great light, is they might throw a tantrum on the floor. And that's not, you can't reverse that and say, if kid is having tantrum, therefore great light. The same things that you see can mean very different things underneath. This is really important because it's a universal principle and we talk about it often. You should never get that out of your mind. And then the next layer of important things to call out here is that when you think of holiness, and now I will say the word, you think of things that are actually not very tightly coupled to actual holiness. Because you wouldn't consider, now switching back to the term light, you wouldn't consider a sign of great light being throwing a temper tantrum. And yet it is, if it's for this reason that I've just shared with you. And so how important is it to develop perception of the world that goes deeper than the surface? Because if all you're looking at is the surface, then yeah, the best you can do is make some short list of this is good and a short list of this is bad, and kids who throw temper tantrums are bad kids. Now, it wasn't that easy. Yeah, and it's going to be wrong in some cases, even though it's the minority of cases, right? In some cases, and what you're going to exclude with that oversimplified measure are the best kids that exist. That is a generic principle. It's true of commandments, it's true of people, and it's true of little people, whether they're young or midgets. Sorry. Okay. This itself is a quality of holiness. Making a joke about midgets. So you think, how dare you? That's so crude and crass, and that's mean for people that are midgets. You know what? An honest person with a disability is sick and tired of people acting fake around them. If you're in a wheelchair, everyone sees you're in a wheelchair. If you're a dwarf, which I guess is the preferred term, I don't really understand why that is, but I don't get to pick because I'm not one. If you're a dwarf and people pretend like you're not a dwarf, that's not a good thing. It's dishonest, right? And no one likes being patronized. No one does. We want to deserve to be treated well and to be treated at least as well as we deserve, but not fakely, right? And so it's good to crack jokes about things sometimes, because it's good to joke about all things sometimes. And if you've got areas where it's like, well, we can never crack a joke about this, and it's not some highly sacred thing that makes sense with, right? Well, why wouldn't you crack a joke about it? Just ease up a little bit, you know? So, if you know, like, I don't have much hair on the top of my head, and my kids comment from time to time about me being bald, if they didn't do that, I'd wonder what's going on, because kids notice things and I happen to not have a full head of hair. And it doesn't bother me, right? This isn't some choice that I had. It doesn't reflect on me as a person, although it reflects the sun off the person. See? Jokes. Like, it's fine. It's good, right? And I don't have like bad feelings. I couldn't care less. It really doesn't bother me. It makes my life easier because I don't have to pay for haircuts. Let's move on, right? And so what's the big deal? Okay. So that's the point I'm trying to make with what we think of as holy. It's different than what actually is holy. And this is part of the big challenge of unpacking, perceiving and valuing Jesus, is that you can't impose your filter on that. You have to rip your filter apart and take it from above, because good comes from above. It doesn't come from within you or from below. It radiates into within you, but it doesn't come from below. It comes from above. So anyway, okay, where were we? So they won't like doing what they don't fully believe in. So here's a practical tip for how to deal with these kids. Don't lie to them, and don't lie to them by claiming something's important when it isn't. Don't give them fake reasons for why they ought to think it's important. Come up with real reasons, or don't make them do it. Right? Okay, here's one that's going to surprise you. Typically, they're afraid of the dark. That one should throw you for a loop. But I'll tell you why. These kids come to Earth with a greater range of... They know that greater good and greater evil exist than most people do. And they completely and utterly lack the equipment to understand what they know or how they know it. And it manifests in different ways that you wouldn't predict. So in terms of knowing that greater evil exists than what people around them realize, that's actually what drives them to see problems before other people do. That's an influencing variable. That's one input that influences that attribute. Because they know bad things are out there. Somehow they know. Okay? And they will try to see things in the world that justify that pre-existing supposition. And it's more than a supposition. It's a deep belief that there's great evil in this world. So in a normal child that's not bombarded by terrible things, they will be at a loss to find real things that justify that deep belief. And so they'll attach it to things like the dark or monsters. And so they'll have what might seem like an extreme fear of things like this. And I will give you an example of this from my own life, and I'm going to try to stay away from that in this presentation. But In this case, well, I could also tell you a story from the life of Gandhi, but let's go with my life. So this one's more colorful. In this case, back in the 80s, I would assume, is when it came out. But by the 80s, when I was a little kid, maybe 5 or 6, my mom had a copy of a record called the Monster Mash. And you've probably heard the song before. There's nothing about that song that's scary. It's a really silly, Halloween kind of whatever song, right? And the cover of this album was cartoonish. It had like, as kid-friendly as this sort of thing can be, Dracula and whatever on it. I was absolutely horrified by this record. I mean, you have never seen a kid as scared of something ever as I was scared of this record. And every time, my older brother loved when my mom played it. Every time she played it, I would just cry and scream and like go to her to be comforted. It freaked me out beyond belief. And at first, I think she thought it was kind of funny because it's hard to take kids' reactions seriously when they're ridiculously over the top, But she realized how terrified I actually was. And it got to the point where she smashed the record in front of me so that I knew it had gone away forever. And when you see things like this, you might be tempted to say like, man, we need to go see a psychiatrist. This kid's off his rocker. But she didn't know what was going on, nor did I. How could I, right? But she just did the best she could with it. And I think she did something really good with it. Because it turns out that the only way you can really give someone hope against the magnitude of darkness that exists here, I'll say suffering and malevolence because it's more specific. Darkness can also just refer to what is unknown. I commonly use it as a simpler term for suffering and malevolence. So maybe I'll just keep doing that. So the only sufficient cure for an awareness of great darkness is an awareness of great love. And part of that love has to be the power to overcome the suffering and malevolence. And this is what Jesus provides us in his example. So there's a flip side of this property. So I told you that they come to earth with a greater awareness of the magnitude of evil. They also come to earth with a greater awareness of the magnitude of good and of love. They have a more full memory of the love of God than everyone else does. And this makes them do different things for different reasons. And sometimes the same things for very different reasons. So just as they try to find something in this world to hang their pre-existent belief of evil on, the depth of evil, they will desperately try to find something in this world that justifies their pre-existent belief of the magnitude of good and love. And so one manifestation of this is you'll find that they invest uncommon love and desire on people and things. And the way you'll see this, there are several, but one prominent way is that the degree of devastation, just absolute devastation they will experience in what other people consider just fully normal, this happens all the time kind of disappointments. This is something that you need to watch out for because it occurs in many more people than the few that have the faith to try again. So I think, at least theoretically, this is a speculation on my part, I think all kids try at least once. No matter what their magnitude of prior belief about the degree of love that's possible here, they try at least once to find something worthy of that. And then when they're crushed, which the magnitude of crushing will be commensurate with the degree of love that they come to earth expecting. When they're crushed the first time, how they react to that will determine the limits of the good that they will do in this world for the rest of their lives. That sounds pretty dang dramatic, doesn't it? But it is that dramatic. And so to try again, and to try again, and to try again, that is also a property of this light. I could tell you many stories about that, but we'll move on. They ask questions, okay? And they're not dumb questions. There was this kid, Kevin, who my mom babysat. I'll never forget. Kevin, if you're out there, no offense. I don't think you're going to watch this, but maybe. Kevin, how old was he? He might have been 6 or something at the time. And my mom's name's Anna. He'd always go, Miss Anna, I'm thirsty. But old thirsty Kevin, he would not stop asking questions. And every single one of those questions was just dumb, dumb, dumb. So again, asking questions is not sufficient, but the kinds of questions, so asking many questions, a large portion of which, here's the key, stump adults. They stump adults. So it's not just the fact that they're curious, it's that their curiosity is revealing a complexity of thinking and understanding that blows right through what satisfies normal people, what satisfies the curiosity of normal people. They see the world differently, and you can tell by the questions that they ask. So they might even take the framing of something simple, like, why do we call this this? But they reveal a depth of interrogation that exceeds what is normal. They investigate what we take for granted. Again, some measure of this is very normal for children because everything's new to them. But what I'm talking about exceeds that. And they keep going when normal kids are satisfied with the explanations. These types of kids will grow up to be the lost sheep that Jesus spoke of because they will not be satisfied on the same grass that the normal sheep eat. They'll call out things in our systems of thinking that don't actually make sense. So if you find yourself with a kid who asks questions that you don't know the answer to, you might have one of these. They will absolutely, horrifically hate busy work. They will hate it, hate it, hate it. So obviously the most prominent version of this is schoolwork. And the pain these kids endure in normal school is hard to describe. They have a sense, so we talked about their pre-programmed range of evil and light, that they fully, evil and good, love and hate, all these things that they come to earth with. One of those is meaning. They come to earth with a depth of meaning, and maybe they haven't found what fills that, but there's a hole there that's big and it needs to be filled. And so when they're sitting through school, every stupid thing that they have to do there, it overflows it dwarfs the challenge that normal kids find at school because they have to recite these things and learn these processes and whatever. It it shrinks that down to nothing. That part is piece of cake easy for them. And the huge thing that they have instead of that is that every second of that school day is full of things where they feel this burning, tearing inside of them, this screaming that says, this is pointless. There is so much more than this. There's no point in doing this. And that becomes an enormous barrier to performing on all the things that you're tested on in public school. And so maybe this results in them getting bad grades, but if they have a lot of light, they will find a way to make it work. It will just be hidden. The degree of challenge that they've gone through to get the same exact result as everyone else will be hidden. And maybe they might even end up in GT classes or getting A's or whatever they do these days. But it costs them a heck of a lot more because they're working under these hidden obstacles. But that's not the only busy work situation. Like, let's say there's a group of kids playing video games. They'll be content to just sit there and watch rather than play. And you say, well, that's quite a small thing. Why would you call attention to that? That these are things that are hard to see, right? But they won't be sitting back for the reasons people might assume. They'll rather watch because every second of their experience is augmented by an increased portion of the Holy Ghost. And the Holy Ghost is an augmenter. They talk about augmented reality. Some of us have been living in that for a very long time. We didn't even have to buy expensive goggles to do it. So as they watch someone else play, they're still free to drink deeply of this augmented stream of information. And the more embedded they are in processes or even with people that take away the creative control, the more out of that stream they're taken. And as that stream reduces, it causes them tremendous discomfort, like pulling a fish out of water. And you can imagine the most comfortable hot shower in the world and how hard it is to turn off the excuse me, how hard it is to turn off that water and get about your business, especially if you have to go to work and do something you don't care about or you have a particularly hard day ahead of you. Multiply that by like 1,000,000 and that's what it's like, It's very unpleasant. So they will learn to craft their lives to stay in and maximize that stream. But unless they have someone to guide them and teach them, it's going to take a long time if they figure it out at all. They probably will have made all the decisions in their lives already that guarantee some limit on that if they ever figure it out. So it's very important for these kinds of kids to have mentors who know what's up. They will frequently see a better way of doing things, and they will rebel against adults who try to make them do it in a lesser way. This could cause a lot of problems at work. And so it's important for these kids to figure this out at a young age so that they can learn how to wear a mask, which sounds terrible, right? But it's really important to learn how to operate in a system where you don't get to make the rules. And so if they have jobs or something like this at a really young age, it might help them figure out that sometimes you just have to do things that you're told to do in order to make money, which sounds terrible from a moral perspective, but I'm not talking about doing evil things to get money. I'm just saying that for these kinds of people, it's not going to feel terribly different to do less functional or less efficient things for money than it would be if someone were paying them to do very bad things for money. And they need to learn to just grit down and bear it when they have to be subject to people that see and feel less than they do. And think. See, feel, and think less than they do. They also will have to learn how to keep their mouths shut, which is not easy, because again, it pulls you out of that stream, and you'll feel like your whole inner being is screaming, and that's not fun. They will seem like old souls. I remember once hearing a father say of his, then adult, but younger adult son, when he was born a 35-year-old man. And this is that attribute. They will seem like old souls. And they'll feel a lot more comfortable with older people than they do people their age. They'll feel like they're hanging out with babies if they're hanging out with people their age, or even people slightly older. They will gravitate towards people who have lived long, intense lives, who have paid the price to acquire great wisdom and experienced greater depths of life. Because they will frequently feel much more than other people do. Their emotional responses will be typically different than others, but almost always greater in magnitude. This is another one that can be easily misdiagnosed as some named mental disorder, but and maybe it is, but in the case of these people, it's not. It's for very different reasons. They actually have really good reasons for feeling this way. And they can't always put words to that if they're young enough, or rather if they're not old enough to have paid attention to and mapped this out. And this is another of many, many, many opportunities for them to get off the path to their full potential, is by trying to shut this down and thinking it's a bad thing. Most typically because some adult told them, instead of learning why and learning to practice this, to use it for greater outcomes, and also to direct your life to the place and the people where it becomes an asset instead of a liability. They will have strong feelings towards protecting the innocent. You'll find them doing crazy things that don't make any sense for their people their age, in terms of, desires to go build an orphanage somewhere, or even fighting bullies, things of this nature. Of course, a lot of these manifestations are going to be correlated with gender. You'll see girls, for instance, with these tendencies, they'll really, really, really like being around babies, like really like it. And this is another example of something that could show up and mean something other than the good things that I'm talking about. Sometimes women or girls, but females, I should say, I'm talking about at all ages, sometimes females who have an affinity towards children see this as an escape. It's almost like taking drugs, because it helps them escape life. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who see the selfless aspect of children. They see that as a greater source of the purpose of life. Because like I said, with these people, what they're doing is they're searching at all times. They're searching for greater manifestations of light. That's what they're doing. So girls will gravitate towards babies for the right reasons, and guys will do things like get into fights with bullies. And also they might want to start orphanages and things. So it's sort of a Venn diagram. They'll have very strong feelings about justice. And let me explain that, especially in light of our twisted modern meanings. if a kid like this is in a situation where he or she works really hard and then they get less than the outcome they were promised, it is going to be a monumental offense to them. Like monumental. I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of a lot of things as I say all of these that I'm not going to share with you just yet, or ever, I don't know. But I could bring up, I'm not going to bring up. When they're treated poorly, even though they've done good, they're going to really have a problem with that. So, and it's not just for themselves. They will. This is actually kind of a quite bright beacon, because the difference is so strong. They will go out of their ways to secure justice for others, even when it costs them quite a bit. And it's an odd thing to see, because most people couldn't care less as long as it's not them. But to see a child, of all people, speak up about things and try to do something about it, that's really something. So this is a partial list. It's not a full list, but I hope that I've given you some things to think about here. I can tell you it's quite something. So here's a principle for you. You've got to be one to see one. I'm giving you ways of seeing beyond what you can see here, but in general, you've got to be one to see one. And it's quite something to live in a world that's so dark and come across a child that has this light. And they don't know, and their parents don't know. And what could you say? What could you possibly say to make the situation better? And yet you see this. It's really something. It's super rare, but it's happened. So I know that these kids are out there, and you have access to situations that I do not. And if you see these children, especially in your own household or the households of your descendants, if you're a grandparent, take special care of them, because God has sent them here to do certain things. And if you are in their circle, you can guarantee that part of your mission in life is to help them to come up to and do what they are meant to come up to and do. So take that seriously.